Long before Yellowstone became a destination, before roads, viewpoints, and visitor centers defined how humans experience the land, this region existed as a vast, interconnected system governed by movement, tension, and time. Mountains rose and eroded over millennia. Rivers shifted their courses slowly but relentlessly, and forests expanded, collapsed, and regenerated in cycles far older than any written history. At the center of this living network stood a predator rarely seen, yet constantly felt, an animal whose influence extended far beyond its physical presence. Wolves shaped Yellowstone not through domination, but through pressure, through the silent understanding that survival required awareness, movement, and restraint. Every animal knew where wolves might be, and that knowledge alone altered behavior across the landscape. For thousands of years, wolves and elk evolved together, locked in a dynamic relationship that strengthened both predator and prey. Wolves removed the weak, the sick, and the slow, preventing overpopulation and disease, while allowing the strongest individuals to survive and reproduce. But predation was only one part of their influence. More important was how elk moved across the land, rarely lingering in one place for too long, constantly adjusting their routes, avoiding narrow valleys and exposed riverbanks where escape would be difficult. This constant movement allowed vegetation to recover, giving young trees time to grow and rivers time to stabilize, creating a balanced system that regulated itself without intervention. When humans expanded westward, this balance was misunderstood. Wolves were not seen as regulators of ecosystems, but as threats to livestock, competitors to hunters, and symbols of an untamed wilderness that resisted control. Fear, rather than understanding, shaped policy. Government-sponsored eradication programs encouraged the elimination of wolves through traps, poison, and bounties. Over time, these efforts succeeded. By the early 20th century, wolves had vanished entirely from Yellowstone National Park, removed with an efficiency that left little room for doubt or reflection. Their absence was celebrated as progress, as proof that humans had imposed order on the land. At first, the consequences were not obvious. Elk populations increased dramatically, filling valleys and open meadows in numbers never before seen. To many observers, this abundance appeared to confirm that removing wolves had improved the ecosystem. Hunting opportunities expanded. The landscape seemed productive and stable, but ecosystems are not governed by abundance alone. Without predators, elk no longer needed to move cautiously. They settled into predictable patterns, grazing the same areas year after year, especially along rivers where food was plentiful and terrain offered safety. As decades passed, the effects of this unchecked behavior accumulated. Young willows were eaten before they could grow beyond reach. Aspen saplings were stripped until entire groves vanished. Cottonwoods failed to regenerate, leaving behind aging trees with no replacements. The loss of deep-rooted vegetation destabilized riverbanks, allowing soil to erode into streams. Rivers widened, became shallower, and warmed under direct sunlight. Seasonal floods grew more destructive, while droughts became more severe. Yellowstone's physical structure was slowly unraveling, not through sudden disaster, but through prolonged imbalance. These changes rippled outward in ways that were difficult to see but impossible to ignore once understood. Beavers, dependent on willows and aspens to build dams, nearly disappeared from large areas of the park. Without beaver dams, wetlands dried up, reducing habitat for fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. Bird species that relied on dense shrubs for nesting vanished. Insects declined alongside the plants they depended on. Coyotes, once kept in check by wolves, flourished, placing additional pressure on small mammals and altering seed dispersal patterns. Yellowstone was becoming quieter, simpler, and less resilient. For decades, this altered state was accepted as normal. It wasn't until ecologists began studying predator-prey dynamics more closely that the deeper cause became clear. Predators influence ecosystems not only through killing, but through fear. The mere presence of a top predator forces prey to remain alert, to move frequently, and to avoid exhausting any single resource. Fear itself becomes a shaping force, guiding behavior in ways that ripple through every level of the ecosystem. This realization led to a controversial idea. If wolves had once shaped Yellowstone, perhaps their return could restore what had been lost. The proposal to reintroduce wolves sparked intense debate. Ranchers feared livestock losses. Hunters worried about declining elk numbers. Politicians hesitated, caught between science and public pressure. Critics argued that the ecosystem had adapted and no longer needed wolves, while supporters insisted that adaptation was not the same as health. In 1995, after years of study and argument, the decision was made. Gray wolves were captured in Canada and transported to Yellowstone, where they were released into a landscape that had not felt their presence for nearly 70 years. Their return marked the beginning of one of the most closely observed ecological experiments in history. The wolves adapted quickly, forming packs, establishing territories, and resuming their role as apex predators. But the most profound changes did not come from the number of elk they killed. They came from how elk began to behave. Almost immediately, elk altered their patterns. They avoided exposed riverbanks and narrow valleys. They moved more frequently and unpredictably. Areas that had been overgrazed for decades were suddenly given time to recover. Willows grew taller. Aspen saplings survived their most vulnerable years. Cottonwoods stabilized riverbanks once again. The land responded with remarkable speed, as if waiting for the return of a missing force. As vegetation returned, so did the animals that depended on it. Beavers reestablished themselves, building dams that slowed rivers, created wetlands, and reshaped entire valleys. These wetlands supported fish, amphibians, insects, and birds, increasing biodiversity and improving water quality. Wolves also provided food for scavengers, leaving behind carcasses that sustained ravens, eagles, foxes, and bears. Even the soil benefited, enriched by nutrients returned to the ground. Yellowstone began functioning as a complex, interconnected system once more. Rivers regained structure, forests regained density, wildlife regained balance. The ecosystem became more resilient, capable of absorbing change rather than collapsing under pressure. The wolves had not controlled Yellowstone. They had restored its ability to regulate itself. The return of the wolves did not happen all at once, and it did not happen quietly. When the first gray wolves stepped out of their crates into the snow-covered valleys of Yellowstone in the winter of 1995, they were not reclaiming a kingdom that remembered them. They were entering a land that had forgotten how to live with predators. For nearly 70 years, the ecosystem had learned to exist without fear at its center. Elk moved differently, rivers flowed differently, forests grew differently, and humans too had reshaped their expectations of what nature was supposed to look like. The wolves were not just returning animals, they were returning a force, a pressure, a presence that would ripple outward in ways no one fully understood at the time. In the early days, the wolves were watched constantly. Biologists tracked their movements through radio collars, following their slow explorations of valleys and ridgelines. At first, the wolves stayed close to where they had been released, cautious and alert, learning the contours of an unfamiliar world. They hunted small prey, tested the landscape, and began forming social bonds that would eventually shape the structure of their packs. These early moments were fragile. Every step the wolves took carried uncertainty, not only for them, but for the experiment itself. Would they survive? Would they hunt effectively? Would they conflict with humans beyond the park's borders? The future of the wolves, and perhaps the future of Yellowstone itself, hung quietly in the balance. As the wolves settled in, something subtle began to change. Elk, which had long dominated the park in massive numbers, started behaving differently. For decades, elk had grazed freely along riverbanks and open valleys, lingering for long periods in the same areas. Without predators to push them along, they had learned that stillness was safe. But wolves reintroduced fear into the equation, and fear reshapes behavior faster than any physical barrier ever could. Elk began to move more often, avoiding open spaces where they could be seen and chased. They spent less time near rivers and more time in forested areas where escape routes were complex and visibility was limited. This shift alone, driven purely by the presence of wolves, would become one of the most important ecological changes in Yellowstone's modern history. Over time, these behavioral changes cascaded outward. Willow and aspen trees, which had struggled for decades to grow beyond the reach of grazing elk, finally found relief. Along riverbanks, young shoots that once would have been eaten almost as soon as they emerged were now allowed to grow taller, stronger, and more resilient. These plants did not return overnight. Their recovery was slow, uneven, and deeply tied to the movement patterns of elk herds. But year by year, green corridors began to reappear, where bare banks once dominated the landscape. The land itself was responding, not to direct intervention by humans, but to the quiet influence of a predator doing exactly what it had evolved to do. As vegetation returned, the rivers began to change as well. With stronger plant roots anchoring the soil, erosion slowed. Riverbanks stabilized, channels narrowed, and water began flowing in more predictable paths. These physical changes altered water temperature, sediment flow, and habitat availability for countless species. Fish found better spawning grounds. Insects thrived in healthier aquatic systems. Birds returned to areas where trees and shrubs once again offered shelter and nesting sites. What made this transformation extraordinary was not any single change, but the way each layer depended on the one before it. Wolves influenced elk, Elk influence plants, plants influence rivers, and rivers influence life itself. Among the unexpected beneficiaries of this new balance were beavers. For decades, beaver populations in Yellowstone had been in steady decline, largely due to the lack of suitable vegetation needed to build dams and lodges. With the return of willows and aspens, beavers found the resources they had been missing. Slowly, they returned to valleys that had been abandoned for generations. As beavers built dams, they created wetlands that further transformed the ecosystem. These wetlands stored water, reduced flooding, and created habitats for amphibians, birds, and small mammals. Once again, the influence of wolves extended far beyond their immediate presence, shaping the landscape through a chain of indirect effects. But the story of Yellowstone's wolves is not only one of ecological triumph, it is also a story of tension, conflict, and deeply divided human perspectives. Outside the boundaries of the park, ranchers watched the return of wolves with apprehension and fear. For them, wolves represented a threat to livestock, livelihoods, and a way of life passed down through generations. Even a single wolf attack could have serious economic consequences for a ranching family. These concerns were not imagined, and they were not trivial. As wolves expanded their range beyond Yellowstone, conflicts became inevitable. Cattle and sheep were sometimes killed, and emotions ran high. The return of wolves forced society to confront a difficult question. How much space are we willing to give to wild nature in a world increasingly shaped by human needs? To address these conflicts, management programs were established, including compensation for livestock losses and strategies to deter wolves from grazing areas. These efforts helped, but they did not erase the deeper philosophical divide. For some, wolves symbolize the restoration of a broken ecosystem, a sign that nature could heal if given the chance. For others, they symbolized unwanted interference, an imposition of distant environmental values onto local communities. Yellowstone became not just a biological experiment, but a cultural one, testing whether coexistence between humans and large predators was truly possible in the modern world. Within the park, however, the wolves continued to thrive. Packs established territories, raised pups, and developed complex social hierarchies. Each pack became a family unit, bound by cooperation, communication, and shared survival. Wolves are not solitary hunters, they rely on coordination and trust. Hunts are carefully orchestrated, with individuals playing different roles depending on terrain, prey behavior, and experience. Older wolves pass on knowledge through action rather than instruction, shaping the skills of younger members over time. This social intelligence is one of the reasons wolves are such effective predators, and one of the reasons their presence resonates so deeply within the ecosystem. As years passed, scientists began to understand that Yellowstone was experiencing what is known as a trophic cascade, a process in which changes at the top of the food chain ripple downward through every level of the ecosystem. While trophic cascades had been studied before, Yellowstone provided one of the clearest and most dramatic examples ever observed. It showed that predators do more than kill prey. They shape landscapes, behaviors, and even physical geography. This realization challenged long-standing assumptions about conservation, forcing scientists and policymakers to rethink how ecosystems function when key species are removed or restored. The wolves also changed the way people experienced Yellowstone. Visitors began arriving with new expectations, hoping for a glimpse of these elusive animals moving through snow-covered valleys or silhouetted against distant ridgelines. Wildlife watching became a powerful economic force, drawing photographers, filmmakers, and nature enthusiasts from around the world. Entire communities benefited from the renewed interest, demonstrating that living predators could generate value in ways that went far beyond traditional resource use. The presence of wolves added depth to the park's story, transforming it from a static landscape into a living, evolving system shaped by ancient relationships. Yet even as the success of wolf reintroduction became clearer, debates continued. Population management, hunting policies outside the park, and legal protections became ongoing sources of controversy. Wolves do not recognize political boundaries, and their survival depends on decisions made far beyond Yellowstone's borders. Each policy shift, each change in legal status, carries consequences not only for wolves, but for the ecosystems they influence. The story remains unfinished, shaped by evolving science, shifting values, and the delicate balance between preservation and human activity. At its core, the story of Yellowstone's wolves is a reminder that nature is not a collection of isolated parts, but a network of relationships built over thousands of years. When one thread is removed, the entire fabric weakens. When it is restored, the system does not simply return to its previous state. It transforms, adapting to new conditions and revealing connections we may never have fully understood. The wolves did not restore Yellowstone to some imagined past. They created a new present, one shaped by the return of an ancient force to a modern world. And as the sun sets over the Lamar Valley, casting long shadows across grasslands and forests reborn, the distant howl of a wolf echoes through the air. It is not a sound of dominance or conquest, but of belonging. A signal that once again, the land remembers how to breathe, how to balance, and how to live with fear as a necessary and vital part of life itself. The changes brought by wolves to Yellowstone did not occur only in places where they could be seen. Many of the most profound transformations happened silently, almost invisibly, within the minds of the animals that began living under a new ecological reality. Fear in this context was not a constant state of panic, but a permanent presence, a psychological force shaping decisions at every moment. For elk, the mere possibility of an attack altered travel routes, feeding times, and even the choice of resting places. This type of behavioral pressure, known by ecologists as the ecology of fear, proved to be as powerful as direct predation. Before the arrival of wolves, elk dominated the landscape with near-mechanical predictability. They fed for long periods in the same areas, especially along rivers and open plains, where vegetation was most nutritious. The absence of predators allowed this stable pattern to persist. With wolves present, every decision carried risk. Remaining too long in one place meant vulnerability. Open fields offered visibility, but also exposure. Forests provided cover, but made escape more difficult. The result was constant movement, a landscape in flux, where no space could be exploited indefinitely without consequences. This new behavior had profound effects on plants that for decades had been held in a juvenile state. Trees such as quaking aspen and willow were finally able to complete their growth cycles. These plants did not merely increase in number, but also in structural complexity. Taller branches, denser canopies, and deeper root systems began to support a greater diversity of life. Songbirds returned in larger numbers, finding suitable nesting sites. Specialized insects reappeared, drawn to plants that had previously been unable to survive long enough to sustain them. In the soil, another silent transformation was taking place. With less intense trampling and reduced overgrazing, the ground began to recover. Microorganisms, fungi, and bacteria played a crucial role in this process. Organic matter accumulated more evenly, allowing greater retention of water and nutrients. Mycorrhizal fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, expanding their ability to absorb nutrients and further strengthening vegetation. These processes, invisible to the naked eye, are fundamental to the health of any ecosystem, and their recovery in Yellowstone was directly linked to the indirect presence of wolves. Comparisons with other regions of the United States reinforce this understanding. In areas where large predators remained absent, old patterns persisted: wider and more unstable rivers, impoverished vegetation, and lower diversity of birds and insects. Yellowstone became a living laboratory, demonstrating that the absence of predators does not simplify nature, but impoverishes it. Complexity arises from the balance between opposing forces, and wolves represented one of those essential forces. At the same time, other predators began responding to the new dynamics. Coyotes, which had thrived in the absence of wolves, saw their populations decline. Wolves compete directly with coyotes for territory and food, and their presence drastically altered that balance. With fewer coyotes, smaller species such as foxes, hares, and rodents experienced reduced predation pressure. This, in turn, influenced seed dispersal and plant regeneration across broader areas of the park. Once again, the influence of wolves spread outward in ever-widening circles. Scavengers also played a crucial role in this renewed system. Carcasses left behind by wolves became vital food sources for a variety of species, especially during Yellowstone's harsh winters. Ravens, eagles, vultures, and even bears depended on these remains to survive periods of scarcity. Rather than waste, wolf predation fueled a complex web of life, ensuring that energy and nutrients were redistributed efficiently throughout the ecosystem. Bears in particular benefited from this new reality. Grizzly bears and black bears frequently took over wolf kills or fed on leftovers after hunts. This reduced the need for bears to seek human food, lowering conflicts with people. The presence of wolves therefore indirectly contributed to the safety of both wildlife and human visitors, a connection rarely considered during the early debates surrounding reintroduction. Perhaps the most profound impact of wolves in Yellowstone was symbolic. For many Americans, the wolf represents something ancient, a direct link to a past when nature was seen as vast, unpredictable, and wild. The eradication of wolves in the 20th century was driven not only by economic concerns, but by fear and misunderstanding. Wolves were viewed as villains, threats to be eliminated. Their return forced a reevaluation of this collective imagination. Documentaries, books, and scientific research began portraying wolves not as monsters, but as invisible architects of the landscape. This new understanding influenced younger generations, shaping a more holistic and less anthropocentric view of conservation. Yellowstone became a symbol of ecological redemption, an example that past mistakes can be partially corrected when there is a willingness to listen to science and respect natural limits. Even so, ecological success did not eliminate ethical dilemmas. The management of wolf populations remains a delicate issue. At times, population growth required intervention to prevent imbalances or intensified conflicts outside the park. Each decision sparked heated debates, revealing how conservation is often a negotiation between competing human values. Preserving wildlife demands more than good intentions. It requires difficult and sometimes unpopular choices. What Yellowstone taught the world is that nature does not respond in linear ways. Small initial changes can generate disproportionately large consequences over time. The introduction of a predator results not merely in fewer prey, but in a complete reorganization of ecological relationships. This lesson has global implications, especially on a planet where keystone species continue to disappear at an accelerating pace. As the 21st century advances, the challenges faced by Yellowstone mirror those confronting the natural world as a whole. Climate change, habitat fragmentation, and human expansion place constant pressure on already complex systems. In this context, wolves represent resilience, adaptation, and nature's ability to reorganize when given sufficient space and time. When we observe a wolf moving silently across the snow, we are not merely watching an animal in motion. We are witnessing an evolutionary force at work, shaped by thousands of years of adaptation and interaction. Each step carries the weight of a deep history, intertwined with rivers, forests, prey, and even the humans who now observe from a distance. And perhaps this is Yellowstone's greatest lesson. Nature does not need to be controlled in order to function. It needs to be understood, respected, and, when possible, restored. Wolves did not fix Yellowstone alone, but without them, the landscape would never have found its renewed balance. The howl echoing through the mountains is not merely a wild sound. It is a reminder that life thrives in complexity, and that nature's true power lies in the invisible connections that keep everything in motion. As time passed, Yellowstone ceased to be merely a national park and came to be seen as a mirror of what happens when humans choose to intervene or choose not to intervene in nature. The presence of wolves revealed something that had been ignored for decades. Ecosystems are not simple collections of isolated species, but living systems deeply interconnected, where every absence creates a void that reverberates across generations. Wolves were not just predators at the top of the food chain. They were silent regulators of behavior, movement, and balance. This understanding began to influence environmental policies beyond the park's boundaries. Scientists and land managers started using Yellowstone as a reference when discussing the reintroduction of predators in other parts of the world. In some regions, such as parts of Europe, similar projects began to emerge, often facing the same initial resistance that wolves encountered in the United States. Fear, misinformation, and economic interests continued to shape public opinion, but now there was a concrete example showing that coexistence was not only possible, but beneficial. At the same time, the return of wolves raised an uncomfortable question. To what extent are humans willing to accept nature in its most authentic form? For decades, parks and reserves were shaped to appear wild, but within carefully controlled limits. The presence of a predator that hunts, kills, and displaces other species forces a direct confrontation with natural reality. This is not a static or safe landscape, but a dynamic environment where life and death walk side by side. For many visitors, hearing a wolf's howl for the first time is a deeply emotional experience. It is not just the sound itself that leaves an impression, but what it represents. The howl carries echoes of an ancestral past, from a time when humans did not yet dominate the landscape and had to coexist with forces greater than themselves. In Yellowstone, this sound breaks the silence and reminds us that nature is not a backdrop created for contemplation, but a living system that follows its own rules. Over the years, researchers began to notice something even more subtle. The presence of wolves seemed to restore not only ecological balance, but also a sense of natural order. Where there was once overpopulation, there was now movement. Where there was stagnation, there was renewal. This constant dynamism is essential to the health of any ecosystem, and its absence can be just as damaging as direct habitat destruction. However, Yellowstone is not isolated from the modern world. Roads, cities, and agricultural areas surround the park, creating invisible yet very real boundaries. When wolves cross these limits, conflicts arise. Ranchers fear for the safety of their livestock, and local communities often feel overlooked by decisions made by distant authorities. These conflicts reveal an uncomfortable truth. Preserving nature requires negotiation, empathy, and above all, shared responsibility. Over time, financial compensation programs, GPS monitoring, and adaptive management strategies were implemented to reduce these conflicts. While not perfect solutions, they represent efforts to reconcile human interests with ecological necessity. In this sense, Yellowstone became not only an environmental experiment, but also a social laboratory where different worldviews must coexist. As the global climate continues to change, new challenges emerge. Less predictable winters, more frequent droughts, and wildfires alter the delicate balance that took decades to rebuild. Wolves, like many other species, must adapt to a transforming environment. Even so, their presence offers a crucial advantage. Complete ecological systems tend to be more resilient. Where there is diversity and interconnection, there is a greater capacity to absorb shocks and reorganize. The rivers of Yellowstone continue to flow more steadily, supported by vegetated banks and healthy soils. Forests continue to expand slowly, providing shelter and food for countless species. These processes are neither fast nor spectacular, but they are deep and enduring. True ecological restoration unfolds on timescales that extend beyond a single human lifetime. When we look at old photographs of Yellowstone, taken before the reintroduction of wolves, we see an impoverished landscape, even if it appears grand at first glance. Today, that same landscape pulses with life at levels that did not previously exist. This transformation did not happen by chance, nor was it the result of a single decision. It was the product of political courage, scientific persistence, and above all, the willingness to allow nature to reorganize itself. Wolves are neither heroes nor villains. They carry no moral intentions or hidden agendas. They simply exist, following instincts shaped by thousands of years of evolution. Yet their mere presence was enough to alter the course of one of the most famous ecosystems in the world. This forces us to reflect on the role each species plays, including our own. Perhaps Yellowstone's greatest lesson lies not only in biology, but in humility. For a long time, we believed we could control nature by removing what we considered inconvenient. Wolves proved that such decisions carry deep and often unpredictable consequences. Restoring balance does not mean returning exactly to the past, but creating space for natural relationships to emerge once again. As the sun sets over Yellowstone's mountains and the landscape falls silent, the distant howl of a wolf echoes once more. It travels through valleys, forests, and rivers, carrying a story of loss, return, and transformation. It is not just the sound of a predator calling its pack. It is the sound of an ecosystem breathing again. And as long as that howl continues to echo, Yellowstone will remain a living reminder that nature, when respected, has an extraordinary capacity to heal, not perfectly nor instantly, but deeply and enduringly. Wolves changed Yellowstone, but perhaps more importantly, they changed the way we understand the natural world and our place within it.